So we'll start now with the first tutorial for simulation and prototyping. And what I want to do with this is to kind of start simply. And the way that I like to work with the tutorials is that I want to build something along with you. You can see how I'm doing it, what components I'm using, how I'm thinking about it, and you can kind of follow along. You can then use this tool and begin to replicate it. And then what I really want you to do is to begin to tinker with it. Try and break it, try and understand how it works through interacting with it. So what I'll start with here is what we're going to make for this first step. And what it is just simply two independent circles. They're going to be connected with a line. That line then will move in space, or move not in space because we're working two-dimensionally here. We'll be operating in the kind of plan. And what that'll do is then through moving those two circles, it will inscribe or trace another line. And here I can show you what that looks like. In that as I move this slider, we can see that this will just move through, and we can see both circles moving. And we can see the line that's connected between the two circles, and at the end of it there's a point, and that point is then tracing a line in space. And I've done a couple things and we can talk through them. What we're able to do is we can change the dimension of either of these two circles. We can change the length of the line at the end of that circle. Here's the other circle. We can change its size. What I like about this is that it's doing a couple of things. One, this is something that we couldn't, or at least personally, is very hard for me to visualize what would happen as these two circles move through their sequence. The other thing is that we can see as we make these changes in terms of where the circle's located, what's going on. One is that it's interactive, and so we can change these things, and it's calculating this on the fly. And so we can make changes, we can interact with the model, we can interact in a couple of different ways, and we can see the result of that. And then at the same time, with the way that I've built this, we can then also still cycle through a kind of animation. And so as we move the slider through its sequence, we can see both where it's going to go with the gray line and where it's already completed with the black line. And so I want to build this now with you. So I'm going to start by creating a new Rhino file. I'm going to do large objects feet. And I'll also save this and make a new document here. So we should be more or less familiar with the interface for Grasshopper. What we'll do in Rhino is we'll work in the top view. We're only going to work in plan this time. You can see I've also modified my background. I got rid of the gray grid. I got rid of some of the other things so that I just have a really clean white background within Rhino. That's nice for when I'm doing some of the screen recordings and so that I can see it more like a drawing. So what I want to do is I want to start with a point, and what I'll do is build one of these circles first, and I want to get you into the mindset of constantly moving this and seeing what the behaviors are, making sure that it works before we get too far. And the point here is just an easy way to put a point in space that we can work with. We want a reference between the two, so I'm going to create a point container. And the way that I did this, again, is I just double-clicked on the canvas, and that allows us to search for things. And I know that this is a point container, and I'll start with this one. I'll right-click it. Oh, sorry. Set one point, and then I want to select the point that's over here in Rhino. We can see it has a green X through it, and they're referenced in between. So let's start with making the circle. And what we will be doing is just working through different components, and let's also build the mindset for this. We have a point in space. Next thing we want to do is to create a circle. So, and it's pretty intuitive. I want to make a circle. You'll see that there's a couple of different types. The hexagons around things are those containers. We did that for point a second ago. So circle, we can see that's a circle container, but we want to create a circle defined by a base plane and a radius. So we can see we bring this in, it brings in a plane already. Well, in this case, we want to set, or let's create a plane. It's defaulting to 0, 0, 0, but I want to make a plane at xy. And so I just type xy. This comes up. And so the way that the planes work is that we can see over here that the xy is the plan view or the top view. So that's how I want to be working. And what we do is we set the center point of this. So now we see that the grid just moved over to there. The reason why we have 2 is that the circle brings in a base plane with it. And so that's what's already defined, but we want to reset that, not to be at the origin, but to be at our point. So we see that that changes. We're going to need another input for our circle. Right now it's set to radius 1. I'm going to create a slider. And the way that I like to do this is just to use, you can see, let's say I want to use something between, I want the initial value to, let's be 8, but I want this to also maybe go up to 25. And so if I do 8 less than 25 and then equals, it'll give me a slider that's, its initial condition is at 8, and it'll go up to 25. So we'll set this to be the radius. Maybe I can turn that down back to 8. And the reason why I wanted to create my own plane as well is that I can hide that plane now. So we can keep these things kind of simple as we go. So what I want to have is a line within the circle that I can rotate. Well, what we'll do first is we're going to move our center point to the vertical position, and then that'll allow us to create a line which then we can rotate. Remember, we want to think kind of procedurally and step by step. So how do I get to having that thing that I want? I need to build a couple of things along the way. So I'm going to create, or I'm going to pull up a move, which is just the simplest move, should be the default here. And for move, we need geometry, and we need a vector. So the geometry that we want to move will be that first point that we had, and the vector that we want to use is in the y direction. I just want to move this up to be at 12 o'clock on the clock, and we can see that with the grid, either with the grid that you have on your screen or this icon down at the bottom, it's in the y direction. So let me type y, and we can get a vector in the y direction. We'll give this a magnitude, which will be the same as a radius of our circle. And that's exactly how far we're going to move our point. And so now you should have a point at the 12 o'clock position. And that's pretty easy. Next thing that we'll do is we'll create a line between those 2 points. You can see there's a few different lines. The one with the hexagon is just a container. The second one up is a line between 2 points. And so this will be the first point, A, will be the center point that we started with, and then our point that moved. We just plug those into the A and the B, and now we can see we have a line as well. So all of our components are here. The last thing that we want to do, at least for this initial step, is to rotate this. So let's add a rotation. I'll type rotate. And now we can see that a grid or a frame or a plane comes back. And this, we're going to want to rotate this circle around that first point that we made. So we'll grab that point. We will, actually, let's see. We already have a plane where we want it. So we can reuse this plane and place it there. And then we need geometry and a rotation angle. So for geometry, let's take our, let's see, I'm hesitating now because I'm not sure if I want both of these things to be rotating or just the point. But let me, why don't I do just the line? Because we can always pull the points from it later. We can see it's defaulting. I want to change one thing too. Its default is radians, but if we right click, we can change this to degrees. And what I want to do is to come all the way back to the beginning. I want to make another slider. This time in my mind that'll be degrees. We don't have to set the units, but let's say we want it to be from 0. I want us, the initial condition will be 60, and this will go to 360. Type enter, and then we can plug this in to the angles. Now we can see as we rotate this, that swings around. The thing that I don't like about that, let's see, there's two things. I want to hide the plane, first of all. The second thing is that it's not moving clockwise, it's moving counterclockwise. Just for this, I want to change that. So I'm going to right click under the angle, under the rotate. We can do this a couple of different ways. Maybe I should do this. I'm going to double click. I'll do multiplication. And the easiest way to engage a wire that's coming through is we can double click it. It'll add this little relay switch. What I actually want to do is I want to multiply. Let's see. I want the result of this to be the angles. I want this. Let's see. I want to multiply A times a number. This is maybe not how I would do it myself, but I'll show you guys the right way first. And this number, I can right click. I'll set a number here, and I want this to be -1. Basically what I want to do is I just want to change the direction of that rotation, and I can also label this -1 so I know later what that is. So now, as we change our rotation, we can see we're going clockwise, 90, 180, 270, and 360. So that's good. Let me change this A to be rotation angle so I know what it is later. I could also call it kind of animated angle as well. So we have this first circle. Let's do one more thing before we copy this, and let's capture the endpoints of this rotated line. And so now we can see what shows up are the green endpoints. We only want one of those. So I'll type point. And then what's nice about this is that if you're not sure what's the start point or the end point, you can swap these out. And I want this end point right here. So I can actually hide both endpoints. I can keep that rotated line. I can get rid of this line. Not get rid of, but hide. And now we have this. So we can come back, we can rotate, and this is working and it's making sense. We can also change the size of our circle. So that's good. Let's do one more thing now. Let's copy all of this, and let's see. There's a couple things that I want to keep consistent and a couple things I don't want to keep consistent. So the rotation angle, I want to stay the same rotation angle between the two. And so I'm just moving these things so that when I window around this, I'll do Control C, Control V, and slide this one down to the bottom. And we can see right now it inherits that angle slider. Let's add another point in Rhino, anywhere, doesn't matter. And let's update this second one. We'll right click on the point and we'll set 1 point. And we'll select that. So now we can see, because we're using that same angle, both of these will rotate, and they're rotating the same way around. That's working. And we have 2 points on the end, here and here. And so let's now make a line between the two using those 2 endpoints. So we'll connect that point, and we'll connect this point. Now we have a line between the 2 of them. So that's moving around and that's working. So the last thing that I want to do, well, maybe not the last thing, let's see. I want to pull the radiuses over a little bit. I like keeping my sliders and the way that I control something to the far left. And I can even group those together. I can show you that later. So we have this working. Let's just change one of the circles. Good. That's 1 full rotation. The other thing that I want to do is I want to create a new slider that allows me to rotate one of my circles at a higher frequency than the other. So let me add another slider. And so let's set this to be between 1, let's start at 2 and go to 5. And again, we can always change these later, but this will be our multiplier. And so what we'll do is let's multiply this. Knowing that we were multiplying here by -1, why don't we change the slider to be from -5. Oh. So we'll set the minimum to be -5. We'll set the maximum, let's see, -5 maximum, let's do -1. I'm just accessing these by double clicking them. And so we have to go from -5 to -1. And we can see the way that this slides. Let's set it somewhere around -2 to start. And we'll replace the -1 from this multiplication. And we can delete that one. Now, because we're multiplying that rotation angle by this multiplier, as we change this, we can see that the second circle is rotating a little more than 2 times faster than the other circle. And we can see a couple of other, well, at least one other thing that's happening here that we want to address. The line between those 2 endpoints is doing exactly what we told it to, which is to draw a line between those 2 endpoints. For what we want to draw, I want that to be a fixed length, not necessarily between those 2 points, but an overall element. And so as we rotate this, we can see the way that that's changing. There's another type of component that allows us to construct a line, not by endpoints. So when I search for line, it's start, direction, and length. So this component will allow us to work from here. And so let's select, let's go from having the first radial line be our start. We'll have the direction be the line between the 2 endpoints. And then let's come all the way back to the beginning and let's set a dimension, probably something, 5 being the minimum, let's say 15, and we'll make it go up to 25. We'll see if this works. Drag this guy, connect him all the way out to the length of that line. We can see, you can just barely see that it's green, but it needs to be much longer in order for it to be greater than both of those, and it might need to be longer than 25. So I'll set the max to 50. And let's see. We can just see that that just came out at the other end. There we go. So there it is set at 50. So that looks good. Let's rotate these again. Okay, and what I want to do is I'm trying to make sure that the length of that new line is longer so that it doesn't kind of slide off from itself. It'll work fine, but it just looks weird when that does that. Okay, so that's working. I'm just going to rename these so that we know what they are. I'm going to call this outrigger length. And remember, B here is, let's call it frequency multiplier. That's how fast the second circle is rotating in relationship to the first. All right, this looks pretty good. So now we can understand the way that it's moving. Let's get the endpoint of that line so that we can use that again. So we'll do endpoints. And we'll do the same thing. We'll create a point container, and it's the endpoint. So we can hide the two endpoints of that, and now we've got the end. So this is working. And so what this does, what's different from what you saw when we started, is that we have this simple kind of simulation now of these two circles moving in relationship to one another. This is probably a good moment to pause if you need to pause. And what I'll do is I'll stop this and I'll move to a second section where what I want to do is build out the overall curve so that we can visualize that. So let me know if you have any questions about this first stage. What I'd like you to do is to just work back and forth between, you can move your point, either of those 2 points. You can move them within Rhino. You can change any of these lengths. So play a little bit with changing the radius of the circles, circle A or circle B. You can animate this by moving the slider. We can also change the rotation angle. Let's change it from 0 to 360 to 720. Makes it a little easier when you want to just keep rotating it a little bit. It can go 2 full rotations. And you can also see what happens as you increase that multiplier. So play with it a little bit and see if you can begin to get a sense for what happens. You can modify any of the sliders by double-clicking them. And then I guess the other thing before I stop this stage is that we can just group these together. I'll just create a window around them. I'll use my middle mouse button and then group. If I select the group and right click, I can then name this. Let's call this inputs. And so as we zoom out and we see our first definition here, we can see the purple square. We can always change the color of this. And so we can make those unique. So play around with this a little bit and see if you can start to get a sense for what, if we were to trace these endpoints, what that might look like.